and sustainable supplies of key raw materials like copper and lithium and energy sources like green hydrogen. These are crucial for our industry and for the green digital transition, and we can work together for our mutual benefit. Honourable members, as you know, we signed the new EU-Chile agreement last December. The Commission hopes that the agreement will come into force very rapidly. On the EU side, after the consent of the European Parliament, the interim trade agreement can be rapidly adopted by the Council. The Commission understands that Chile will also start the ratification process very soon. If all goes well, we may have the interim trade agreement in force after the summer. The agreement has all elements to become a success story. The Commission is committed to make sure the new agreement lives up to its potential over the next decades. We have all work cut out as soon as the agreement comes into force. I'm referring to the review of the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter of the agreement. We have negotiated an ambitious joint statement for the review of the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter. This review process is to be launched as soon as the interim trade agreement comes into force. The text of the joint statement clearly spells out our level of ambition. We cannot prejudge the outcome of the review, but we will strive to achieve a very ambitious outcome. We are aware that this is a top priority for the Parliament, and I'm confident we will be able to meet our objectives through the review of the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter. With regard to this, in preparation of today's debate, the Commission has issued a formal statement on the role of and the arrangement with the European Parliament in the forthcoming review of the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter. The statement is being sent to the Parliament services for inclusion in the verbatim record of this debate. I would like to conclude by thanking our Chilean counterparts and friends for a very difficult job well done and for the good cooperation. I have expressed also such thanks of remarks to the Chilean ambassador that is present today with us. And we have enjoyed during this journey, again, the same cooperation and wish both well for the work ahead. So thank you very much for your support, and we have a lot of things to do to achieve the entry into force of such an agreement. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ κύριε Επίτροπε και τώρα έχει το λόγο ο κύριος Guerreiro.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mr. Guerreiro on behalf of the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. Commissioner,
the EU-Chile Association Agreement in force since 2003 has significantly expanded bilateral trade, including in the agri-food sector, making our continent Chile third largest trading partner. However, the trade deal now needs to be modernized in light of the changed geopolitical landscape. Therefore, we welcome the inclusion of the new sustainability provisions in the Trade and Sustainability Development chapter, as well as a review clause to account for changing environmental and social standards and, for the first time, a dedicated chapter on trade and gender equality. To be noted also the inclusion of a dedicated chapter on sustainability food systems that promotes bilateral and international cooperation, including provisions on animal welfare, in particular mutual commitments to maintain the phase-out of the use of antibiotics as growth promoters in place in Chile since 2018. However, there are challenges to be met. We need to ensure that Chilean producers and exporters will apply the production standards equivalent to those of EU farmers on food and feed safety and quality, traceability, sustainability, animal welfare, and the use of veterinary, medicinal, and phytosanitary products. To conclude, this is not a perfect trade agreement, but it's clearly an improvement from the one that lived for more than 20 years. Thank you very much.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Προχωρούμε στον κύκλο των ομιλητών εκ μέρους των πολιτικών ομάδων.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of the political groups, Mr. Mato has the floor.
Thank you, President Commissioner. 2 decades ago, the agreement between the EU and Chile came into force. Today, 20 years down the road, after a process of negotiations which started back in 2017. I'm delighted to note that we finally started talking about adopting this modernised agreement with Chile, which is, Chile is of course a crucial partner for us. We share many values with Chile. I hope that these good news will also be mirrored with similar agreements with other Latin American partners such as Mercosur and Mexico. This agreement brings with it great benefits, as we've heard, amongst other things the elimination of tariffs for 98% of EU exports, while at the same time improving access for our businesses to Chilean public procurement and vice versa. Moreover, it addresses the specific needs of SMEs, and it improves our access to raw materials such as lithium and copper. It's very important to underline that this agreement does provide greater protection to more than 216 European GIs for agricultural products, adding to the additional ones, wine, spirits, protecting thousands of EU GIs. The European Union used to be Chile's biggest trading partner. We're now its third largest, although we're still the biggest investor in the country. I hope that this agreement will enable us to further consolidate our trade relations. I also welcome the modernisation of the treaty based on the agreement regarding facilitating international trade. It's important to point out that it's essential that we step up our efforts to try to minimise red tape for businesses. I would wind up by calling on all member states to ratify this agreement as quickly as possible so that we can roll out its implementation as quickly as possible. You can count on my support for the giving consent to this agreement.
Ομάδα των Σοσιαλιστών και Δημοκρατών, το λόγο τώρα έχει η κυρία Μαργαρίτα Μάρκες.
Margarita Marques. Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, Ambassador, colleagues. There are two key chapters that mean that the Socialists and Democrats fought for. The partnership between European Union and Chile is a strong partnership and a progressive agreement. And there are two key chapters in this agreement. First of all, on sustainable development, there are legally binding commitments on environmental protection, but also climate change and social and labor rights. Both sides need to commit to effective implementation of the Paris Agreement and the ILO conventions. Secondly, gender equality. This standalone chapter, for the first time in this type of agreement, it's clear and essential that the European Union must continue to promote fair international trade based on rules. Now, given the different diversity of our political partners, we need to have high standards when it comes to sustainability. But it's also a progressive agreement because it respects the interests of both sides, both partners, and it's mutually beneficial. The current government of Chile announced its economic development strategy, which is based on industrialization. And this is why protecting its own raw materials is key. And this agreement respects that principle. Now, at the same time, the European Union can diversify its market and diversify its sourcing and become more resilient. The government and its effort to be close to the citizens and the Chilean economy signed the agreement on the 9th of December, and that paid off for the Chileans. It paid off also for the Europeans. Thank you.
Europe, τώρα το λόγο έχει η κυρία Μπιλμπάου Παραντίκα.
Ms. Bilbao Barandica.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I would like to welcome the signing of this advanced framework agreement with the Republic of Chile. It builds on our existing association agreement. This is a model we should follow when it comes to the commercial or the trade and political architecture for the next few years. It includes within the agreement the main chapters of the Green Deal, an enormous step forward when it comes to promoting our environmental standards around the world. It also provides a clear road forward to provide new trade opportunities for our exporters, in particular in the agribusiness. A report published this week by the European Commission underlines that overseas sales for this sector and are as many as between 13 and 20 billion euros more than they would have been without the agreement. This is very important for both parties, and the agreement is based on existing social and environmental standards. This gives access to European businesses to the resources they need for the green transition, while supporting Chile in the process of modernization so that it can secure its own objectives when it comes to the use of renewable energy, as well as diversification and added value in the field of technology. It adds improved market access for public procurement, development and sustainable development. It also underpins sustainable food systems, offering great protection in the country to 216 European GIs. It's also a world leader when it comes to incorporating the gender aspect. This is historical. It's important that we remember that it also enables us to protect the rights of indigenous populations in Chile. We see this agreement from the point of view of trade and sustainable development, and seen from that viewpoint, it's the most ambitious agreement the European Union has ever signed. If we look at it from the political point of view, this association agreement consolidates Chile's strategic role as a partner of the European Union in the southern cone of Latin America.
Thank you, Ms. Cavazzini, for the Greens.
Ja, lieber Kommissar, liebe Kolleginnen und
Commissioner, colleagues, I think here in Parliament we all agree that our supply chains and our trade needs to be more sustainable. This isn't just true for what happens within the EU, but for our work outside as well. And this agreement presents significant progress in this area. We've got we've taken important steps towards deforestation-free trade. And this Parliament and you, Commissioner, want to ensure that our supply chains are strong and are not morally bankrupt. This is something which we've achieved with our agreement with Chile, and that's very good. It's also very important that we've got a gender chapter for the first time ever. It's great that we've got a sustainable food chain chapter as well. But I think when we're talking about the minimum standards that we achieved with New Zealand, this represents a bit of a step backwards. We've got no sustainability chapter as we had within New Zealand. This one is really toothless. I think, unfortunately, this is a bit of a missed opportunity. I think our fight against climate change in Europe cannot be justified when we look at the lithium imports that we're talking about here. And so I think, therefore, for that reason, this agreement does not go far enough. Something else which is important is that this Parliament, with a very big majority, supported investment policy in line with our climate policy. Here, I think there's work yet to be done, and the agreement with Chile has used old standards and not the proposals that this Parliament put forward, and I think that's a real missed opportunity, and I think there are a lot of complaints in this regard waiting for us. This is progress, but we're by no means at the end of this. I think we need to fight for sustainable trade agreements. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bula.
Thank you, President. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Commission and the rapporteurs. This free trade agreement with our partner Chile, which was achieved at the last minute, is some good, a glimpse of good news. It's important for several reasons. At a very delicate period in history, we avoid with this agreement leaving China an open door to take over everything. It strengthens our strategic autonomy when it comes to using critical materials, and it confirms our belief in free, rules-based trade at a difficult time of deglobalization and fragmentation. It's obviously achievable to set ourselves high objectives. There's also an important section for our SMEs, and we should stress that the impact on farmers will be minimal. The impact of this agreement acts as a lever for improving working conditions, sustainability, and the fight against climate change. Obviously, it will promote imports and exports by enabling both partners to create an enormous number of jobs. Eurostat figures confirm that trade in goods and services is undergoing relatively faster growth than the European economy as a whole. Finally, Commissioner, the European Union has to step up its game. We need to conclude more trade agreements, which are an important engine for growth and stability in this very unstable era.
ID τώρα το λόγο είχε ο κύριος Μαριάννη.
Alors que la France entière est
Well, the whole of France is looking at the farming and agriculture fair, and at the same time the European Union is signing an agreement that's a threat for farmers. Tons of beef, sheep meat and poultry being traded under this agreement. It's a new step towards the abyss that farmers all face. And I would like to warn my compatriots about all those who support this trade agreement with Chile. It will be enter into force right away after the vote in Parliament and will have disastrous consequences for farmers who are already suffering at the hands of the unjust customs arrangements with Ukraine. Right now, 30% of meat consumed in France is imported. We're seeing a new, each new quota is a nail in the coffin of French farmers. You say that it's just a drop in the ocean, it's just a tiny portion of total consumption. But it's the same for New Zealand and all the other regions that we will agree with, Mercosur, for example. Then we have trade deficit, 160 billion in 2022 and similar for 2023. Macron hasn't kept his promises vis-à-vis the French people. And on the 9th of June next, we should change course. Thank you.
Την ομάδα της αριστεράς τώρα το λόγο έχει η κυρία Ομπρή.
Monsieur le Commissaire,
Commissioner, colleagues, in the last few weeks, we've seen people supporting farmers, telling them how much we care for them, saying that we have to help them and we need to support them. But did you say that whilst at the same time thinking you would be voting on this massive trade agreement, and not just this one with Chile, but the one with Kenya as well? Did you tell them that? Did you tell them that the EU is going to be importing millions of tons of poultry, sheep meat, beef, grapes from the other side of the world, as if our farmers don't know how to produce all of this themselves here in Europe? Did you tell them that you're going to expose them to even more unfair competition? Because, of course, they're already feeling the effects of the more than 40 free trade agreements that we've already got in place. Mr. Macron spoke to them and talked to them about the support they would receive, and yet it seems that they're being sacrificed once again. You're a bunch of hypocrites. Hypocrites and liars. Explain to me exactly how this is ambitious and sustainable, how it is ambitious and sustainable to import products from the other side of the world when we know how to produce it here, when the people producing it earn far less, they use GMOs and they use pesticides that are banned here in Europe. Now is the time to speak the truth, and it is only my group here in Parliament that's going to be voting against this. The Social Democrats, the extreme right, the Liberals, none of them are going to do the same. And what's worse is that you're not going to learn the lesson from this. After Chile, it'll be Mercosur, Indonesia, Mexico, a lovely world tour with unfair competition everywhere. But we need to be clear. Our food should not come from the other side of the world, and we should not have farmers from the other side of the world making a profit off the backs of our European farmers. It is the people who should be feeding us here should be the people who work within Europe. We do not want multinationals to earn while our farmers go bankrupt.
Το λόγο έχει τώρα η κυρία Γιώρη.
Ms. Gyuri.
Tisztelt képviselőtársaim, örülök, hogy
Dear colleagues, I'm very happy that we can conclude with the last dot, we can conclude this agreement with this renewal. We now discuss a new free trade agreement. You could think that the EU is just continuing signing these agreements one after another. But if you look back into the past, you see that it's only Vietnam with whom we managed to sign something, and that was in 2020, and that was the previous Commission, not this one. This Commission is focusing on green and digital transition, and they are sacrificing everything. Objectives, they are setting objectives that are impossible to achieve because we do not have the necessary critical raw materials. To get these critical raw materials, we would have needed such trade agreements and a network with partnering countries. What did they do? Extra burdens on companies and partner countries were practically insulted with sustainability requirements, and that's how the agreement with Mercosur was lost. This is an over-ideologized policy, trade policy, and we can see the results. I hope the new Commission will learn from the mistakes of the current one, and it will be more business-friendly. Thank you.
Το λόγο τώρα έχει ο κύριος Γκαρθία Μαργκάλο ή Μαρφίλ.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia Magallo.
Señor Presidente.
President, Commissioner, honourable members. Now, the fact that we're discussing this agreement here today is good news. The European Commission and the European Union in general has not paid much attention to the Latin American continent, and that's a snub against the continent when we're seeing a rise of illiberal and anti-democratic regimes, and also a liberal agreement because it was a pioneering agreement, as we were with Mexico, and we need to be able to show that we are able to move in the right direction, as others have said. We have seen trade doubling since 2003. Now, there are themes that are covered here that couldn't have been in the preceding agreement, digital trades, but also legal certainty, which, of course, needs to be a given when we see the threats that exist there just as they exist here. Now, there are good reasons for us to welcome this agreement. We liberalize the farming trade sector, and we are striking balance between the trade in goods and services. We talk about investment. It should be taken as a template for future agreements when it comes to drafting agreements and their implementation. Well, to those who criticize it from the left, I think we have to have a balanced position. We need to take into account farmers' needs, but also the needs for trade relations, especially when we look at the situation faced by farmers in Spain right now and the pressure that we see in the food chain. We also need to consider the problem of products entering from third countries that do not meet the strict requirements. So I once again stress the importance of Latin America, South America, and bilateral agreements. Interruption from the President.
Gracias por su generosidad del tiempo, Presidente.
Σας ευχαριστώ και εγώ για την κατανόησή σας. Το λόγο έχει ο κύριος Λόπες.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lopez.
Presidente.
Thank you, President Commission. Without any doubt, I think we can celebrate the fact that we finally managed to update this framework agreement with Chile. This is a wonderful example of success after 22 years of an agreement which worked effectively, mutual benefit for both sides, and some increasingly close political and institutional links with a strategic ally, Chile, with whom we share the same worldview. The EU is currently the third trading partner for Chile. For the European Union, Chile is an important strategic market, in particular when it comes to raw materials, which are essential for the green transition. This is a pioneering agreement in many senses. It has a specific chapter on gender equality. That's something we're very proud of in the Socialist Group. Not just this, however, there are also binding legal guarantees when it comes to environmental protection, climate change, and workers' rights. The Paris Agreement and the ILO's agreements. So the modernization of this important agreement and our alliance with Chile isn't just about trade, it's also important in terms of geopolitics for the European Union. It underlines the strategic links we have with a key region for us. I'm talking about Latin America and the Caribbean. This is the first of the new agreements which we hope to sign and strengthen agreements with countries in this region. Moreover, we're doing this with a country with which we enjoy total compatibility. That's entirely coherent with our position in the world, defending multilateralism, peace, and human rights. We are convinced that our relations with that country and the current government will further improve thanks to this agreement, which will enable us to prosper, to share wealth, to fight poverty, and which should act as an example and inspiration for other agreements in a world based on order. This is something which we believe in. We want progress, shared values, and human rights. Thank you.
Το λόγο τώρα έχει η κυρία Βεντρέν.
Thank you, Ms. Vedran.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Commissioner. Mistakes have been made in the supporting the Paris Agreement. A list of GIs have been protected. There's a lack of support for natural resources. Here we're stuck in binary dogmas. We're looking at something which goes beyond geopolitics. Here we're talking about modernization of the relationship between Chile and the EU. The initial agreement that was agreed upon in 2002 is no longer fit for purpose, and this agreement is going to help us to make progress towards better reciprocity, more consistency, and greater protection. Dear colleagues, my fight to move from free to fair trade will never stop. So yes to modernization, but I will always fight outdated agreements such as the one we have with Mercosur. Thank you.
You have a blue card.
I accept it, of course.
You have a blue card from
Manon Aubry.
Manon Aubry. Oui. 30 seconds for Manon Aubry.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Ms. Verdun, I saw you were at the Agriculture Forum, and President Macron was there, and you said that our production system for food is madness. So what does it mean when you import from the other side of the world and instead of producing locally? So when it comes to voting in favor of this free trade agreement, if you're Richard Virenque of free trade, then what makes you want to do this?
Colleague, I listened to you a few moments ago when you called us all hypocrites. What is hypocrisy exactly? Is it having quotas constantly without making changes? 9% on beef, 2% on poultry, 0% on cereals. Now, you're talking to us about Richard Virenque of politics. Well, I can tell you that I'm going to win a lot of fights. I'm not going to stop here.
Okay. Madame Vedren. Yes. There is a possibility for a second and last round. If you accept it, okay.
Vous avez dit, Madame Vedren,
Madame Vedren, you said Richard Virenque was won prizes. How did he win them? By cheating. And that's exactly what you're doing now vis-à-vis French farmers. You're cheating. You say 2% of imports from Chile, plus New Zealand, plus Kenya, plus Mexico, plus Mercosur. So where will it stop? And for each ton that we import into the European Union, it will be a ton of produce that threatens European farmers.
je vous invite.
Madame Aubry, I'd ask you to look at the impact study that was carried out by the Commission on the effect of this trade, firstly. Secondly, you say that you're defending French farmers. You were at the Salon d'Agriculture as well. Well, do you think that you're really defending them when we're not able to win a common fight? That's something you can deal with. I'm going to continue mine.
Για αυτό το δίπλο πινκ-πονγκ και προχωρούμε στην επόμενη ομιλήτρια που είναι η κυρία Βεντρέν. Η Βεντρέν, συγγνώμη, στην κυρία Μασά.
Ms. Massa.
Merci.
Thank you. The agricultural crisis is simmering at the very heart of the European Union, with massive mobilisations from farmers calling for urgent responses to their main demands. They want guarantees of a decent income. However, rather than responding to this urgent appeal, we are about to sign trade agreements with Chile which offer the exact opposite. These agreements open the door wide to massive imports. 9,000 tonnes of pork, 2,000 of pig, 4,000 of poultry, 18,000 tonnes of poultry. These quotas, which apparently are limited by the European Commission, are additional to existing quotas which were introduced recently with agreements with New Zealand. Taken together, these imports represent a big chunk of European production. This production, with extremely low production costs, can only increase the pressure on our poor farmers. These agreements open the door to imports of products which are in non-compliance with our health standards, allowing imports of poultry treated with antibiotics and growth hormone factors, which have been banned in France in 2006 and the EU since 2022. Unfortunately, commitments entered into this agreement are not binding. In Europe, we need a large number of farmers, and by signing these agreements, we are condemning our farmers to a race where they can only lose. Let's stand up and reject these agreements to protect the dignity and the survival of our farmers.
Περνάμε τώρα στον κύριο Ζαχραντήλ.
Thank you, Mr. Zardil.
Pane předsedající, pane komisaři, já samozřejmě podporuji.
Commissioner, thank you. I obviously support this type of agreement. And it's a good way to try and conclude good agreements with other regions in the world. But I'd like to comment on trade policy more generally. If you look at the events of 2019 and 2020, the trade volumes were too low. Why were they so low? Because of COVID and the pandemic, but other reasons too, because we saw a switch towards more protectionism in trade. If you look at what was happening in the United States, for example, there's a strong protectionism there. WTO is negotiating, but the outcomes are not clear, and it's not clear about what will emerge regarding the appeals procedures and in the WTO. The EU has increasingly got non-trade impact or chapters that partners are sometimes not willing or unable to meet those requirements. So we need to think carefully about the type of trade policy we want to pursue. If we continue down this path, then on the global markets, we will probably stand to lose. And we will lose momentum when it comes to global trade. But it's, in fact, trade that allows our economies to grow. Thank you.
Colleagues, the agreement with China is symptomatic of what we've seen in the EU and that the Parliament has seen happen in recent years. Chile's nature is going to become one big open mine. We're talking about 11,000 tons of olives, 40,000 tons of poultry. We have to look at this, of course, as not just the increases, but the whole figure. And if you look at that of the amount of poultry produced in France, it is a significant amount. Now we're looking at mirror clauses as well, which will further worsen things for our farmers. On the agricultural side of things, we're looking at there being ratification for each member state and unanimity in council is required. We have to ensure that we can support farmers in Europe and in France as we can see all of the anger that is pouring out into our streets at the moment. Macron and his government are talking about defending farmers in Brussels, but we can see what's happening here in Brussels. We, therefore, have to be careful and speak out against these trade agreements without ambiguity.
Thank you, President. If it were true that the agreements with Chile were guilty of the same faults with other free trade agreements, socialization of losses, privatization of benefits, I think that would be true. On the other side of the ocean, the winners and losers are always the same. These agreements promote the interests of financiers and investors, which lead to price collapses in some places and lower wages in the other. We're also attacking our farmers. The only winners in here are oligarchs, the agribusiness, while destroying small producers and promoting speculation. With Chile, we've heard a lot about mirroring clauses and sustainability, but these chapters are simply not binding. And moreover, they will last forever. We talk about identical standards on both sides, but we haven't got these. This will promote dumping and environmental damage, as well as damages to consumers, which will further promote poverty in our society. We'll be voting against this agreement. We know that all this talk about modernization will always lead to the same thing. It'll make the poorer poorer and the rich richer.
Thank you, Ms. Rafaela.
It's very difficult to choose the language here because I'm talking to Croatian diaspora who built Chile end of 19th century when Croats were not so competitive and their agriculture in Dalmatia was suffering under high influence of import from wine of Austro-Hungarian and Italian wine. And they couldn't also adopt the shipyard, so they have to go to look for another paradise and to work, and they went to Chile. They built Chile, they built wine industry, and now they're coming back. They're coming back because they built this excellent country that is a perfect example how we should build our future relationship with someone who was chased from Europe at the time they were not competitive. So thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you for doing this after New Zealand to have and to build the bridges. And thank you, Gabriel Mato, for including our amendment that recognizes the key role of Croatian diaspora and of all diaspora that was poor at the time and where the competitiveness was not a tool that we could have used, that we are using nowadays in order to have an equal position in the joint market. So let's not be selfish. Let's vote for this agreement, and let's also provide the historical chance to allow everyone to be competitive and to have a like-minded partner in the future alliances that we need. Thank you.
Mrs. Sofko, you have a blue card. You have a blue card from Mrs. Arena. Do you accept it?
Je suis particulièrement choquée.
I must say, I am profoundly shocked by what you've just said. You told us that the diasporas built Chile. Prior to their arrival, there were indigenous populations in Chile, local populations. So the idea that everything in Chile was built by those who colonized Chile is something which I find profoundly shocking in today's world. We should be respecting the people of Chile, including the indigenous populations.
Arena, c'est pourquoi au début de mon discours.
This is why at the beginning of my speech, I said I'm not sure what language I will speak, because you relied on the interpretation of my speech. I said that the diaspora has helped contribute to the creation of a modern, prosperous Chile. And initially, when they arrived, the Croatians weren't the same as the Italians who you represent. Back then, Croatian farmers from Dalmatia suffered enormously from imports of wine to Dalmatia. So don't distort what I said. You can go and have a look at my speech, have a look at the transcript of what I said to find out what I really meant.
Το λόγο τώρα έχει η κυρία Ροντρίγκες Πινέρο.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez Pinero, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. Today is a great day. As co-chair of the Joint Parliamentary Committee for the European Union and Chile, I would like to express my satisfaction with the agreement that we are voting today. And I ask and call on my colleagues to support this agreement wholeheartedly. I think we can congratulate all those who worked so hard on the negotiating process on both sides, and that hard work will continue when we move to the implementation phase. And I'd like to congratulate the rapporteurs, the shadow rapporteurs, and the negotiating teams on both sides for their excellent work. And I wish to thank Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Chile, and her team, who are with us today on this historic day. And I wish to thank her and express my gratitude to her and the team for the work done on behalf of the Chilean people. Chile and Europe, the European Union, are modernizing the relationship that connect them in a very difficult political context. Both sides need to face the challenges that are coming, and from a basis of mutual respect and mutual trust. And we're going to strengthen economic ties, and I'm not going to speak about the details of the agreement, but this agreement marks a significant step forward when it comes to the political and economic ties between Chile and the European Union, when it comes to sustainability, innovation, fight against climate change, and the fight against corruption, the promotion of human rights, and when it comes to multilateral cooperation, which is so badly needed. Women, SMEs, the natural environment are all relying on us to act quickly with the implementation. This is a pioneering agreement, and it will set a course for the future, for future agreements. This will be a guide, a template for us when we discuss agreements with other regions, and this is a positive agreement for both sides. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ και τώρα το λόγο έχει η κυρία Φον Κράμον Ταουμπάντελ.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. von Kramon-Taubadel.
In the era of geopolitical instability, it is of crucial importance to strengthen the links with like-minded partners. And indeed, Chile is Europe's most important partner in Latin America. The framework agreement is a stepping stone in our relations. As we work on the renewable strategy for Latin America and the Caribbean, we need to make sure that this partnership is based on joint priorities and values. Chile should be an example of how this partnership can benefit both in practice. Chile-EU relations can be a prime example for Europe to demonstrate how to create value chains with respect highly sustainable and green quality jobs. The update of the agreement also serves us to improve Chilean governance, rule of law standards, fight against corruption and respect indigenous communities' rights. Yet, the lack of binding commitments is worrisome. It is now up to both the EU and Chile to prove everyone in Latin America that trade and ties with Europe bring quality and prosperity, as well as respect for indigenous groups. Thank you so much.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Και τώρα το λόγο έχει η κυρία Σάνιον.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Chagnon.
Je suis ici pour vous.
I'd like to issue a call for reason when farmers are expressing their anger, their justified anger in France and across Europe. You continue to inflict further wounds on them and pain on them. This is just opening the floodgates. You did it from Ukraine in 2022, and now you continue with this unfair competition and preventing European farmers from doing their jobs. In France, you have a farmer committing suicide every 2 days. And with the agreement between the European Union and Chile, the situation will only get worse. It's going to increase imports, 18,000 tons of poultry, thousands of tons of olive oil, meats, and other products. And with this trade agreement, we are betraying livestock farmers and producers in Europe. I call upon the members in this hemicycle and this chamber to snap out of this madness and to take farming out of this free trade agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morel.
Chers collègues, l'accord avec le Chili.
Colleagues, this agreement with Chile is a distilled version of European hypocrisy. It's a model in the genre. I've heard us saying beforehand that we're world champions. The old type of agreements are part of the past. We have to share with southern countries, in particular when it comes to extracting their raw materials and the profits. What can we see of all of that? In fact, we see the opposite of that. Commission negotiators deliberately ignored the Chilean desire to change a model. They decided to elect, with the President voted back in 2021, a certain number of issues: ecosystem protection, sharing, mining and extraction value. And we then obtained an agreement with Chile which is highly asymmetrical, imbalanced. We dictate the conditions for trade as well as for extracting lithium. Okay, there are additional quotas for agricultural products with zero tariffs. What strikes me in this agreement is it's highly predatory. I look to my colleagues on the progressive side of this House. I know you're committed to countries from the South. You're in favour of balanced trade. But we're not talking here about balanced trade or fairness. We're talking about predation once again. And this isn't the way of convincing countries from the South about the needs to support our Green New Deal. So, progressive members of this House, wake up at last.
Thank you very much. Mr. Milan Mon.
Thank you, President. I welcome the approval of the advanced trade agreement between the European Union and Chile. It modernizes the 2002 agreement and updates our relations with Chile and highlights this important partners with which we share economic, cultural and social ties, and certainly economic ties. This country in Latin America firmly spoke out against the Russian attack on Ukraine and played a key role in negotiating peace in Nicaragua. Now, there will be critical raw materials we will be able to import, raw materials that we desperately need in Europe, and we're going to diversify our sources of supply and be less dependent on countries such as China when it comes to lithium, for example. It's not only about raw materials, it's also about growth and added value for the industries in Chile. It's not just a trade agreement on services and goods, but there's also a chapter on public tenders and also the fight against crime and drugs trafficking. I traveled to Chile just less than a year ago, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I was able to look at the situation, the harm that's being done by organised crime gangs and drugs traffickers. So I welcome that part particularly. And I hope the agreement will soon be ratified, and I will welcome Chile and relations with Latin America more widely are extremely important. So I regret that when it comes to agreements with other countries in the region, such as Mexico, they weren't concluded successfully. And so I regret this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lange. Commissioner, Ambassador, colleagues. It astonishes me that in this debate, the extreme right and the extreme left are coming forward with the same arguments against free trade. Now, when I'm abroad, I always find French camembert and French wine in the shops. And we have to recognize the fact that we export more processed food to the countries that we're negotiating with than we import. And that is a win for European agriculture. And obviously, we want to have this done in a fair manner. And it's for that reason that we've modernized the agreement with Chile and introduced a sustainability side to it so that both sides have got benefits from the agreement. And I'm proud that we have managed to get a sustainability chapter, a gender in trade chapter included in the agreement, and that we've also got climate change included, because trade policy today, colleagues, is no longer just reducing duty. Instead, it's about sustainable relationships and fair partnerships. And that is what we've achieved with the Chile agreement. We're very proud of it too. Commissioner, we need to continue to negotiate together. We've still got some requirements when it comes down to sustainability. And I think it's absolutely right, Mr. Commissioner, that here as Parliament, we're saying that we want to be involved and that we want to continue to move forward in this context of modern, stable and sustainable trade agreements. Colleagues, that's something we've achieved in this legislative period. We can be proud of it. And if we want to continue to do this, then a good agreement with Chile and good progress in trade policy in the EU is vital. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, Ms. Miranda.
Mari, empiezo mi intervención en Mapudungun.
I begin my speech with a Mapuche indigenous language. And there was signing a manifesto against this asymmetric agreement, an agreement that was negotiated under opaque circumstances without public access to 41 documents. It's a blank check for trade and for extractivist models and to extract copper and lithium. Who pays the price? Biodiversity and the workers. Also, the indigenous people were not consulted. The Mapuche people, those who are most at risk and exposed, who were evicted from their ancestral land in order to grow eucalyptus and were deprived of water and basic resources. So this is the agro-export model that these Chilean farmers do not need, nor do the European farmers need that. It won't benefit the Galician farmers or the Chilean farmers, just as with most trade agreements. And when it comes to the social impacts, it's being imposed where the social partners haven't had an active role in the negotiation. So there is a lack of democratic principles as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Le Breton.
Chers collègues, ladies and gentlemen, everywhere in the European Union we see farmers entering into revolt. However, perched on its ivory tower, the European Parliament sticks to its guns. The proof is that over the last 3 days, this repeated its attacks. On Monday, the Agri Committee attacked French farmers, accusing them of having violated the sacrosanct freedom of circulation for goods by stopping Spanish goods. Tuesday, the Nature Restoration Law, which will further destroy our farming sector as part of the Green Deal. On Thursday, we get ready to give a green light to the free trade agreement with Chile, which will lead to the European Union being invaded with cheap chicken which don't respect our rules. Personally, I've lost any trust in the European Parliament's ability to protect European farmers. I do hope that the new majority which will emerge after the elections on the 9th of June will have a greater sense of its own responsibility.
Thank
you very much. Next, Ms. Pereira.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The EU's trade policy is generally led by the big powers and big multinationals. And when you deal with developing countries, there is a predatory nature that comes out vis-à-vis third countries, and the people end up losing and paying the price. The small and medium-sized producers on both sides lose, and the negative impacts on for farmers are clear. This is just another example of that. The European Union pursues liberalization of mining when it comes to lithium and copper being extracted from Chile, and limits the possibilities of the Chilean authorities to shape its own economy and decision-making. A trade agreement shouldn't be an instrument of neocolonialism. There needs to be respect for the workers' rights, local peoples and ecosystems. When you choose between exploitation and cooperation, the European Union has chosen its camp.
Mrs. Pereira, you have a blue card from Mrs. Rodriguez Pinero. Do you accept it? Mrs. Pinero, 30 seconds for each of you.
Muchas gracias por aceptar.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting my blue card. I wanted to ask you something. Have you read this agreement, this modernisation of the Advanced Framework Agreement? Have you read the various different chapters? Have you read the different words and sentences? Perhaps you could tell me where it said in this agreement that we will maintain monopolies for exploitation of lithium and other minerals in Chile? Thank you.
A política que a União Europeia tem.
The European Union's policy when it comes to trade agreements is exploitative of the natural resources of third countries. This agreement is no exception to that, and we will be voting against it.
Follow up, okay.
Yo le he preguntado si se ha leído la.
I asked you whether you've read this agreement and where in the agreement it says that what you told us. I'm not talking about political positions in the agreement. I understand what you're saying on that, but where did you read that?
Well, there is a part in the agreement that talks about extracting resources, and that is exactly what I'm referring to. There is a continued extraction and exploitation of those natural resources by the European Union.
Mr. Mazilis.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. The updated agreement with Chile is a positive outcome, a mutually beneficial project, an example to be followed. Around 99.9% of EU exports will be tariff-free, which could boost our export to up to €4.5 billion. Chile is becoming a strategic EU partner in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Chile's abundant reserves of raw materials such as lithium and copper are crucial for the development of EU industry. Since sustainability and technological progress are essential, we need to ensure better access to such raw materials. I welcome that both EU and Chilean companies will have improved access to the public procurement markets for goods, services and labour. We all know from geography about the sun in the Atacama Desert and winds in the Cape Horn. We need just considerable investments to develop such renewables. This agreement opens up such opportunities. Moreover, the updated agreement gives the European Union a more active role in geopolitics. The leaders of authoritarian bloc, China and Russia, are seeking to expand their zones of interest in Latin America. Thus, by enhancing our diplomatic and economic links with Chile, we can outweigh this risk and uphold our shared values of democracy, human rights and rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the rapporteurs, the shadow rapporteurs, and also the Chilean side for the good work done on this long-awaited file. This modernized EU-Chile agreement is of extreme political importance. Chile is a like-minded, a trustworthy and a reliable partner, and it is also important to underline that the EU relations with Chile are not only important for a few member states, but they're important for the 27 member states, for the Union as a whole. The agreement will finally deepen our relations and will create new opportunities for trade, jobs, investments in both regions, and I hope that it will also enhance the people-to-people relation. Cooperation on access to raw materials and clean energy are crucial to tackle some of the most pressing current global challenges. Investment in competitive Chilean green hydrogen are an important opportunity for the European Union to promote decarbonization and support our green transition. I'm very glad to see a social dimension included into the agreement with clear trade and sustainable development provisions, a gender chapter, binding commitments on labour rights and rights for indigenous people. And I especially would like to thank the colleagues from S&D Group for their efforts in enshrining this social dimension into the final text and the dialogue they had in Chile with civil society and with the indigenous population. Thank you very much.
Σας ευχαριστώ και τώρα το λόγο έχει η κυρία Ρίμπα Γκίνερ.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Ribeiro.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, our farmers were crying out for help. Don't we hear them? And can't we see them? We hear a clear message, and we will vote clearly against this agreement and any other trade agreement that will have a negative impact on our primary sector. We are against an agreement that some of you pretend will herald growth and prosperity, but in reality will threaten our labour rights, our food security, and our environment and security of peoples. And many large corporations are now on edge following this vote. But it shouldn't be a blank check. A trade agreement is not a blank check. Yes to trade, but not on the back of the environment. Yes, trade is good, but not at the expense of our Galician farmers and the primary sector. Yes to trade, but not on the back of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lutgen. Commissioner, once again, a free trade agreement has got various adjustments involved in it, and here we're not calling into question what was defended here. We've got mirroring clauses in, meaning that what has to come in respects the same social and health standards, and that's not the case with this agreement. And once again, we're going to plunge Europe into an agricultural crisis. 40,000 tonnes of poultry, 2,000 tonnes of beef. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense even if we need lithium for our batteries for electric cars. Everyone who has voted for this, we've said that 100% electric on our roads is not reality. And we're being told that in order to achieve this, we need to extract lithium and therefore we need to give up other things. Well, we are giving up too much for our farmers and for our environment. Thank you very much, Mr. De Castro.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the agreement which we're about to sign are supposed to represent a first step towards the improvement of all trade agreements and our current policies. The objective is to ensure that our supply chains become more resilient while sharing with our partners a greater commitment to sustainable development in trade, in producers' rights and gender equality. We're very much aware of the sensitivity of these issues, and we see a record number of European and GIs, Chilean GIs being protected by the Commission. At the same time, however, there are no future concessions when it comes to production, equivalent production standards, either in terms of food security or safety, or animal well-being or social conditions. The work in the committee, together with the rapporteur, has led to a progressive agreement promoting the rights of workers and companies both in Chile and the European Union. This is an important development with one of our most important trading partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Maestra Martín de Almagro.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. This modernized free trade agreement between the European Union and Chile provides for some extraordinary conditions for exporters, lifting customs duty, and it's going to promote investment. Overall, 4.5 billion euros will be the total worth. Now, this is also an excellent opportunity when it comes to key raw materials, and we will become more autonomous vis-à-vis our dependence on partners that are not necessarily recommended. We need to ensure that sensitive sectors like olive oil or meat products are protected, and that we have protections when it comes to geographical indications. And we do have some 277 new protections. The Chilean farmers and producers will have to respect the same stringent regulations when it comes to food, the quality and production methods. And there's also a strong commitment on the environment and equality. So we want a strong, united support for this report and a little bit less demagogy.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our list of speakers. Now we've got any extras. Mr. Kelly, please.
Mr. Kelly, you have the floor.
As a member of the Trade Committee, I welcome trade agreements. I think we've done quite a few in the last 10 or 15 years, which have been very positive for Europe, because trade agreements are about win-win, and there are thousands and thousands of jobs created in Europe as a result of trade agreements. Also, I think it's very important that we diversify, in particular in relation to critical raw materials, and lithium from Chile will be a big help in diversifying away from dependence on China, etc. Sustainability clauses are good. Climate change is always very important. But there is a caveat, which my colleague here, Benoit, referred to: agriculture. We have to be very careful of the overall impact of trade agreements on agriculture, and that's why I think a sunset clause is very important to see how it's impacting. Because if you have a continuous eroding of internal production, that's not a good thing, and that's something we must monitor. But thankfully, Mercosur has fallen by the wayside. That would have been far worse. Chile won't affect us, I think, that badly.
Thank you very much, Ms. Arena.
Thank you, President. The fact that this EU-Chile agreement is better than its predecessor, no doubt about it. That it's progressive, I have serious doubts because it was signed with the Pineda ultra-liberal government. The fact that it's in line with the new agricultural model, once again, I'm not convinced. This is very much a productivist model. The fact that the agreement might protect rights of workers and the environment. Here, once again, I have no doubts about this. It's simply not the case. There are no sanctions for failure to comply. So, ladies and gentlemen, a question, if I may. Do we want to sign an agreement which, if we were to sign an agreement which didn't protect investors, would you be willing to sign it? I'm absolutely convinced that nobody in this House would be willing to sign an investment agreement without protection for investors. So why is it that we're willing to support an agreement which doesn't provide for worker protection and environmental protection? This is an important question I put to you. I hope you can answer it in good conscience.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of all of the questions, and now we'll hear from the Commissioner, please.
Thank you, President, honourable members. Dear Ambassador, it has been quite a journey from the launch of negotiations to today. But thanks to the hard work and the determination of the Chilean and European teams, including the European Parliament, we have made it. The new agreement between the EU and Chile is a very modern and progressive deal. It is not only good for trade and investment and our respective economic resilience in this challenging geopolitical context, it also sends a clear message to the world about our shared commitment to common values and to sustainability and our resolve to speed up the green and digital transition. The agreement takes European farmers' sensitivities into account. The European Union will not fully open its market for imports of agri-food products. For sensitive products, access to the EU market will be granted in a limited and strictly controlled way. This will be achieved through carefully calibrated tariff rate quotas. It's a modernization of an existing agreement. In the actual agreement, we have already quotas for import of agri-food products with an automatic annual increase that we remove. The Commission would like to thank the European Parliament, and in particular the honourable members who have closely followed the entire negotiating process from start to end, for the very good cooperation with the Commission. This good cooperation and team spirit has undoubtedly contributed to the success of this endeavour. On our part, we shall continue working with you in a spirit of openness, transparency and full cooperation also during the implementation of the new agreement. So thank you very much for your cooperation and for this debate today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Back to the rapporteur, Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you, President, and thank you to all the colleagues who have taken the floor. And on the whole, there is strong support in the House for us and an agreement with this agreement, which is more than just a trade agreement. It's a political and cooperation agreement. And we've heard the views from the far right and from the far left. And we're seeing the same arguments being hurled into the room and clearly are symptomatic of a populism that does run counter to the European values that we share with Chile: multilateralism, sustainable trade, and human rights. Yes. Let me say, we respect this great country that we're signing an agreement with, and there were guarantees throughout the negotiation, and we make a commitment. There's a strong commitment from Chile, and in fact, the negotiations began under Bachelet, continued under Pineda, and now will be signed and concluded under Boric. So I simply ask for respect for this continuity. And what I'd like to say is that the message we send to workers, men and women, the self-employed, SMEs, after this agreement is signed, they will have much better opportunities for trade relations with Chile. They will be able to export or import more easily. They will be able to invest more easily. And both smaller and larger companies on both sides will be able to work together, cooperate and invest jointly. That is the real impact of this agreement. And it's a political agreement, yes. So this agreement does respect the basic principles of two great democracies: human rights, labor standards, very stringent environmental standards. So please, there's only one right course of action today: to vote in favour and consent to the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to Ms. Raffaella.
So thank you, dear colleagues, for your opinions and comments. Look, this agreement, you have provisions in it, and these provisions are binding and enforceable with an enforcement mechanism. The political and cooperation pillar includes an entire chapter on cooperation of sustainable development, which contains comprehensive articles on sustainable development, particularly on the environment of climate change, sustainable energy and ocean governance. And EU and Chile have taken clear commitments on effective implementation of ILO conventions and multilateral environmental agreements, coupled with a dedicated dispute settlement mechanism. So I've had this conversation many times with some of you in the Parliament. First of all, stop spreading misinformation about the impact on our farmers or agriculture. Stop with it. Do not act as if the Commission and the Parliament is not having its facts straight. They have. After every single step that's being made in negotiations, impact assessment and very strong analysis are being made. Constantly, after every single step that's being negotiated. And trade agreements are agreements where you negotiate for the both and not only for yourself or for the EU. These negotiations, especially with Chile, has happened on an equal basis. So I also ask you, then what do you want? Do you really think we can produce our food only here in this continent? Or do you really think we can get our own critical materials? So you want the energy transition, you want food at the table every evening, but you don't want to trade. Do you prefer China then to take over every single continent in this world and then act as if you don't care? Because if you really care, you would be in favor of trade agreements that do offer values, that do offer human rights, instead of leaving it to countries who don't care about human rights. So I suggest that we celebrate this very good step forward in reforming trade. You can't have it perfect immediately, but you can have it very good the very first time. So it will be a very good example for future agreements, and I count on your support today. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Η κοινή συζήτηση έληξε και η ψηφοφορία.
Thank you very much. That brings that joint debate to an end. The vote is scheduled for later today. The next item on the agenda is a Commission declaration on the next stages towards improving patient safety by guaranteeing the quality of medical devices during a targeted transitional period. On behalf of the European Commission, back to Mr. Reinders.
Thank you, President. Honourable members, thank you for putting the Commission's proposal on the agenda of the plenary. Ensuring the availability of medical devices and in vitro diagnostics is key in a strong European health union. This proposal aims primarily to address the imminent risk of shortages of in vitro diagnostics. It pursues three objectives: to ensure the availability of high-risk in vitro diagnostics for health professionals and patients by extending the transition periods subject to strict conditions; to enhance transparency and reduce administrative burden by enabling a gradual rollout of the open database on medical devices; to introduce an advance warning mechanism in case the supply of certain medical devices or in vitro diagnostics is interrupted. The aim of the advance warning is to enable competent authorities and health institutions to consider the mitigating measures that are needed to secure patient care. It is vital that this proposal is adopted in this mandate. Doing so will ensure it can deliver the impact we want and in a timely manner, that we avoid critical shortages and safeguard patients' safety. The Commission very much welcomes that on 21st of February, the Council signalled their willingness to endorse the Commission proposal without changes. The two medical device regulations are a step forward in our rulebook for medical devices. The process for deploying the new rules on the ground was and remains a challenging one, but we need to create the conditions for finishing it. The extended transitional periods are essential to safeguard patient care, and we need them now. However, let me be clear with you, we still need a sustainable solution for the medium and long run. While the Commission is supporting the implementation of the rules through a significant number of non-legislative actions, we are also fully aware of the need for a structural assessment of the two regulations. That is why the Commission has begun working towards a targeted evaluation of the EU medical device legislation. Last week, we announced the plans for a targeted evaluation on the Commission's Better Regulation portal. The Commission will examine how the regulations affect the availability of devices in the European Union, in particular, orphan devices and innovative devices. This was also suggested by the European Parliament in its report on non-communicable diseases of November 2023. We will also look at the cost and administrative burdens stemming from the implementation of the rules, especially for SMEs. The Commission is fully committed to this exercise and to finding sustainable solutions for the future, while safeguarding innovation and competitiveness of medical device system in the European Union. Let me take this opportunity to thank you for your support and commitment to this process. The results of the evaluation will help us to identify where the real issues lie and thus set us on a path to finding the best solution to address these for patients and health systems while promoting innovation. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem, pán komisár. A teraz poprosím Petra Lízeho.
Thank you, Commissioner. And now I'd like to ask Mr. Liese on behalf of the EPP to take the floor.
Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Dear colleagues, there is a major problem when it comes to the provision of medical devices. And the supply problem really is severe when it comes to children suffering from rare diseases, heart disease, for example, present a significant public health risk. And that's why it's crucial that we act as quickly as possible. The medical devices regulation was not just a declaration of good intentions, it was necessary. There was a scandal where thousands of women suffered at the hands of damaging, dangerous breast implants, and many places that hadn't been following the right procedures. For example, somebody, in fact, tried to use the net that you package oranges in as medically suitable for operations. Well, now we're going to have tighter rules and tighter supervisions. That's a good thing. Well, one thing that isn't so positive is that the institutions, in fact, missed their targets and missed the mark. So in addition to necessary rules and requirements, we have rather expensive and unnecessary bureaucratic demands here. And that's why the delays that we're agreeing on here today are just the first step. They're not going to solve the problem, however. We must tackle the problem at the root. And that's why, together with Angela Niebler, I've drafted a 10-point plan. Let me just list 2 of those 10 points for you. We need rules for niche products, for example, heart catheters for children, which already exists somewhere else. And we need to avoid unnecessary rules for renewed certification every 5 years. So this 5-year renewal shouldn't necessarily apply. And this must happen as quickly as possible. People working in the sector need legal certainty, and doctors and patients need the devices so that it can save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask my colleague Helen Fritzon on behalf of the SND Group to take the floor.
Herr talman, kommissionen.
Commissioner, colleagues, the COVID-19 pandemic may seem a long way off now. But we have to ensure that we don't end up in the same situation and that we do have access to the devices that we need. It is a question of life and death for a great many people, and we have to ensure that the pressure on the medical sector is not too high. We saw the pressure placed on the sector in the pandemic, and we don't want a repeat of that. The current situation is unacceptable. We need to ensure that the pressure on the sector does not have a knock-on effect on people's health. It's for that reason that the proposal from the Commission to extend the transitional period in order to ensure that the manufacturers have got time to meet all of the requirements is the right way forward. We cannot continue to move forward with transitional periods and transitional periods. However, of course, we need to ensure that the rules that are coming in aren't unrealistic. We need to ensure that we're giving doctors the tools they need to be able to do their jobs and that patients can get the care they need.
Ich der Kollege Andreas Glück für die Renew Europe bitten.
Herr Präsident, werte Kolleginnen und Kollegen!
President, ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner. There's an old saying, which is something which is used by manual workers, or indeed surgeons, suggesting that you have to close things up properly. If you screw a bolt further and further, it eventually reaches the point where it strips the thread. And the same metaphor would apply to this legislation. When we talk about deobligations, all too often it's not enough simply to change the law. Often it's better to start by looking at improved compliance with existing legislation. What's been happening here when it comes to the tightening up of the regulation on medical devices? This happened during the last Parliament. If every medical product, every in vitro product was subject to this, they would then have to be recertified. Transitional periods for medical devices were running out at the beginning of the pandemic. We were delighted back then to have our own producers of such products and devices. And I'm grateful that back then we succeeded, thanks to a letter as well to the Commissioner Kyriakides, to extend those deadlines. So with data banks such as Eurobank and we can target shortages in certain areas. It's important, of course, to update the in vitro device regulation with extended deadlines, but we didn't succeed in doing that. This means we have to find solutions for products which have been on the market for many years now. If there are any problems with these products, we would know about it. And since we don't know about it, that means there are no problems. If necessary, we have to introduce grandfathering clauses, and we have to ensure that it applies to medical and in vitro products. And we have to have this discussion at the very latest during the next Parliament. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegyňu Beniu za skupinu Identity.
Now, colleague Beniu, on behalf of the ID Group.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Pharmacy stocks are being depleted. Citizens are struggling, having to go round the houses trying to find the medical products they need. And so that's not worthy of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the current system is responsible for this. If you have the regulation on medical devices and certification, that's European bureaucracy needs to stop saddling European pharmacies with unnecessary bureaucracy on these devices. There's now a 4-year additional deadline for the renewal of certifications. Well, the pharmaceutical sector in Europe has been in crisis for years now, and there have been medicine shortages. This was already being discussed at the start of this parliamentary term, but it took 5 years for this House to finally deign to come up with some kind of proposal on this. Well, we need to give the powers to our nations to carry out the research that we need to treat patients. Well, as Europe continually continues to meddle with these policies, it harms public health policy. So put the same energy into this text as you've been putting into the environmental.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the non-attached, Ms. Dante.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, the medical devices regulation risks damaging the national systems, and it presents a risk for the treatment of patients. The situation as it stands at the moment is not something which the member states can resolve alone. COVID-19 showed us the risks that we run. We need to strengthen supply chains, both when it comes to distribution of medical devices and when it comes to preventing future crises. The use of the database will help to improve transparency, availability on the market, and monitoring of supply chains. We require simplification, and I agree with the colleagues who spoke before me. European citizens need to have fair, timely and safe access to high-quality medical treatment wherever they are in Europe. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegyňu Niebler. Nech sa páči.
Ms. Niebler now.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. It's not 5 to midnight. It's already 5 past midnight. We are jeopardizing the health and safety of European patients, and we're driving SMEs which produce medical devices outside Europe. And this will continue if we don't update and review the regulation as quickly as possible. Even now, we see these producers slowly dying out. Heart catheters, implants, life-saving devices and products are becoming a scarce goods here in Europe. We lack products when it comes to ensuring that children with genetic heart problems can be treated. The time really has come for us to finally react. I recognise the fact that thanks to our pressure over the last 2 years, the Commission has already taken initial steps. That's to say, extending the periods for recertification while extending databases for medical devices and products. However, ladies and gentlemen, this is simply not enough. Peter Liese and other colleagues have referred to the fact that we do need a deep overhaul of these regulations. We need to have an accelerated procedure for pioneering medical products. All rules which aren't designed to promote safety but simply red tape should be done away with, and as Mr. Gluck said beforehand, there's no point whatsoever in having a 5-year recertification period for products with a very low risk. We have to do away with that as well. We have an enormous responsibility when it comes to guaranteeing improved patient safety in Europe, and we really must get to work on this during the...
Thank you. Now, Sarah Terdas.
Obrigada, Presidente. Thank you, President. Honourable members, when you have patients in A&E right across European hospitals, you've got consultants, nurses, all trying to work hard. And you need ventilators, heart catheters, and all the other equipment. You're seeing shortages everywhere. Everyone shares the same mission to save lives. And that moment, you need the injections, the ventilators, and all the other devices to do their jobs, to not fail the patient. And so A&E doctors and nurses, consultants, and all others working in the healthcare sectors are relying on the European Union to guarantee the safety of materials that they use. Right now, the companies themselves need a little bit more time to implement those rules. So we need to strike the right balance when it comes to the balance between patient safety and the supply of such devices, life-saving devices. So I just want to say very clearly that the safety of patients will be at the heart of our actions, and Europeans can count on us. Thank you.
Thank you. My colleague Almarik is next.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. The proposed revision of the medical devices regulation and the in vitro diagnostic devices regulation was proposed in 2012 following the breast implant crisis. 10 years later, the implementation of this legislation is still being discussed. Unfortunately, we have to admit that this is a problem which is a long way from being solved. Despite the fact we've got a small number of notified bodies and we've also got a lack of specialized personnel. We are all aware of this, and people have been raising alarm about this. We need an acceptable and pragmatic solution to this issue. If we're forced once again to adapt the regulation to avoid potentially dangerous circumstances for patients, then this should be provisional only. We should not be calling into question this regulation, which is ambitious because it needs to be. It is absolutely necessary for European patients, particularly when it comes to high-risk devices, because patient safety cannot be a variable that we take into account. These standards are absolutely vital in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Tarabella.
Monsieur le Commissaire, chers collègues.
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, medical devices play an essential role in a health system that provide innovative solutions for diagnosis, prevention and treatment of disease. There are more than 500,000 types of medical devices on the European market, ranging from contact lenses to implants, which are an important part of the everyday life of tens of millions of Europeans. Given their importance for health, it's essential that we avoid shortages. In the face of persistent difficulties amongst producers, we've heard about this, but we shouldn't neglect the need to guarantee traceability and quality of devices. Odomed, the EU database for devices on the European market, has to be rolled out more quickly, since this database will make it possible for our citizens to have access to information regarding the devices available, providing them information about clinical advances and problems. Availability of safe devices for European patients must be a priority for us.
Thank you. Next, my colleague Sokol.
Vice President, Commissioner, colleagues, in adoption of legislation on medical devices and in vitro medical devices, most political groups ignored the EPP call for reducing bureaucracy, especially on the number of notified bodies in member states for assessing compatibility of products. Namely, on this legislation, all medical in vitro devices have to be additionally certified by notified bodies, and some of the notified bodies are located in the UK. So therefore, the system as envisaged does not work now. So on several occasions, this has been delayed for revision. We had last year 26 notified bodies with over 23,000 calls for certification. This has been delayed for 2027 for some devices or 28 for some other devices. So we need to revise the legislation for medical devices and in vitro medical devices in all aspects which do not relate to patient safety but to administration, especially in the area of pediatric medical devices and orphan devices. So we need legislative changes to continually supply the market with such devices. It is unacceptable that unreasonable administrative demands play with our safety and health.
Thank you. There is a request for a blue card question, but this will not be permitted because you can discuss it among yourselves since you are from the same group.
Domnule președinte, stimați colegi.
Mr. President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, it's very good that we are talking today about the safety of European patients. Of course, it's late. After 12 years, we are thinking again of tweaking our regulations, but better late than never. Commissioner, in my country and in many other countries, patients do not have access to medical devices. To have to wait 3 months for a CT scan, not to have access to a prosthetic device, not to have children who cannot be operated upon because of lack of catheters or other essential devices. This is unbelievable. This is unacceptable that people still die for lack of access to such medical devices. On the other hand, the internal market, there are a lot of devices that have caused the death of people because of lack of quality. Sanitary systems are in a crisis. That is obvious, Commissioner. And I hope that if we now change this regulation, we will also give a better access of patients to these medical devices on which their lives sometimes depend, because nothing is more important than people's lives. Thank you so much.
Very much. Madam, you have a blue card from the colleague Schwab. Will you accept it?
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grappini. Ms. Grappini, you confirmed that on medicinal products there is a question of the diversity of supplies and the certification that's been delayed. And would you agree with Mr. Sokol, who said that the entry into force of the medicinal products regulation should be delayed by a few years so that we can ensure that all products on the European market currently can remain on the European market? Thank you.
Vă mulțumesc, stimate coleg, pentru...
Thank you for your question, dear colleague. Yes. My background is in engineering, so I'm never favoring improvisations. I think we should make sure that whatever is on the market is safe. Thank you. So yes, I agree with you.
Ďakujem pekne. A teraz poprosím kolegyňu.
Thank you. My colleague Kloon is the next.
The medical device regulation are not being...
Ciele tohto nariadenia nie sú splnené.
To patients and medical practitioners that necessary devices were safe and fit for purpose, which I absolutely support. But there are problems with certification that is resulting in pressure on the sector to ensure availability of these necessary devices. Of course, extending transitional periods are welcome, but this is not a permanent solution. It will not give confidence to the industry to keep innovating and to keep producing. We need structural reforms to the medical device regulation if we are to see any lasting effect. The current regulatory system, marked by its slowness, complexity and demands urgent action for European patients. In the first 100 days of the next Commission, the Commission needs to bring forward a proposal to fix this problem, or we will be left with a situation where Europeans are left without life-saving devices.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Ms. Zambelli.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President, colleagues, Commissioner. The issue of medical devices in Europe is incredibly important and a very hot topic. For years, we've been seeing a lack of these devices, and the sector has got very high production costs. They need very high-tech manufacturing methods, and they can save lives, of course, even children's lives and newborns. The process for manufacturing and for certification is incredibly complex, and this is leading to a lack of devices, particularly in paediatrics. We're facing, therefore, two major risks. First, a lack of medical devices, which puts the lives of European citizens at risk. And secondly, the risk that these medical devices will be imported from China or other third countries, which will increase our dependency on China and will put our health at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now moving to the Catch the Eye part of the debate. Our first speaker is Mr. Kelly.
Obviously, it's unacceptable that patients in Ireland and across the European Union have to wait long periods for life-saving medical aid of one kind or another. And if bureaucracy, and particularly European bureaucracy, is partly responsible for that, we have a duty to ensure that that is removed at the quickest possible speed. Also, as colleagues pointed out, we have to be very careful that we don't drive companies out of Europe because of over-regulation or not giving them the time to do the work they need to do, because innovation takes a lot of time. It isn't always successful, and we have to bear that in mind. But particularly, I think, as has been emphasised, particularly by my colleague Deirdre Clune, as soon as the next Commission is up and running, they'll have to do a complete overhaul of the regulations here, remove the unnecessary bureaucracy, and ensure that innovation can take place, and also the patients will get the medical aid they need as quickly as possible. That has to be done, and it shouldn't be beyond our remit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the Catch the Eye part of the debate. Commissioner now.
Thank you very much for your support for the Commission's proposal. The Commission is looking forward to its formal adoption before the end of this mandate. Its adoption is an important step to avoid critical shortages of medical devices and to safeguard patients' safety. At the same time, the Commission launched a targeted evaluation of the two medical device regulations to analyse the structural problems related to their implementation, which will pave the way to identify possible solutions for the medium and long run. And together, we can continue to further promote innovation and safeguard patient safety in the European Union. So thank you very much for your contribution and for the different remarks that I have had the opportunity to listen today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. The debate is thus concluded. Our next point on the agenda is the Commission statement. Commission recommendation on secure and resilient submarine cables. The first speaker in the debate will be again Mr. Commissioner Reinders. Please take the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les députés.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us are aware of the tricky geopolitical situation here in Europe. We're aware too of how important it is to avoid any breakdown in essential communications. We've had recent problems on energy and communications networks. All of this means that we have to step up our efforts so as to ensure that undersea communications via cables be resilient and safe, both now and in the future. The importance of the role of undersea cables cannot be underestimated. They represent 99% of our data traffic with the rest of the world. Undersea cables also provide the flow of critical data with the rest of Europe, including our islands. The European Union has to step up efforts to enhance the security and resilience in this area. In particular, given the cross-border nature of these undersea cables. In this context, the White Paper recently adopted by the European Commission analyses the challenges which Europe is currently facing when it comes to deploying future connection networks, setting out possible scenarios which enable us to attract investment, promote innovation, increase security, while at the same time creating a genuine single digital market. In the plan, we look into the question of security and resilience of our networks, given the high level of threat which currently prevails in a rapidly changing and dangerous world. This is why, in response to the urgent and repeated calls from member states and players in the sector, we also adopted a recommendation calling on member states to take a series of measures at the national and European level with a view to addressing the main shortcomings while at the same time speeding up preventative work. This work will be coordinated by a new member state working group. This does not exclude the possibility of setting up a new cooperation framework, more comprehensive in nature, which could pave the way to a common governance system for the management of European undersea cables. This future scenario is developed in the white paper. This is a response to the Council recommendation from 2022 concerning undersea cables, which mandated the Commission to carry out studies, to consult the various different stakeholders and experts, and to come forward with a proposal for appropriate measures to enable us to respond to major incidents. Those studies have now been completed, and the results will be sent to the member states, while of course respecting full confidentiality. One of the main conclusions of these studies is that the current EU framework means that we are not in a position to fully step up in the light of these challenges. The EU must be strengthened on this. To correct the shortcomings, the recommendation makes the following points. First of all, member states and the Commission must map out in a very precise way the existing network of cables based on consolidated information at the EU level, setting out risk, vulnerability, and critical dependency. This would then enable us to establish a toolbox so as to guarantee the security of cables, which is something we've already done for cybersecurity on 5G networks. Secondly, initiating initial steps towards a joint approach to high-tech technology and undersea cables, as well as operations to lay cables and the services necessary for rapid repair and maintenance of these cables. Finally, the recommendation contains an important chapter on funding. We want to promote cooperation between member states so as to draw up a list of European or undersea connections which are of European interest. This must be accompanied by risk evaluation and risk reduction methods with a view to opening up funding under various different EU programs, both for the intra-European community, but also for connections with third countries. This action will concern not just the cables themselves, but also ancillary infrastructure, which are an essential part of their operations. I'm talking about the landing points on shore for these cables, communication centres, and deployments and repair vessels. Other important points identified in the white paper will take longer to address, and they will require cooperation which goes beyond the limited scope of the recommendation. For example, reinforcing research and innovation efforts on advanced technologies in the field of fibre and cable, or harmonization of requirements in terms of security. It's also important to underline that the European Union has been developing space-based systems which will enable us to develop secure communications. This recommendation is not the only tool we currently have at our disposal. It works in dovetail with a series of important European initiatives which came into force at the beginning of last year, in particular directives pertaining to measures designed to secure a high level of cybersecurity in the European Union. This is the NIS2 directive and the Directive on the Resilience of Critical Infrastructure. This is the CER directive. Thanks to this whole raft of operational measures which we now have at our disposal, and within a framework of fruitful future cooperation, I'm confident that we can further flesh out this idea of a Europe which protects to encompass undersea cables. Speed will, of course, be a decisive factor if we are to succeed in this endeavour. Thank you.
Monsieur le Commissaire, teraz
Thank you. Our first speaker among the MEPs will be colleague Berendsen on behalf of the EPP group. Please take the floor.
Ja, dank u wel. Het is oorlog.
Thank you. We're in war, but no one sees it. This was a book by Hout Mudderkolk about digital spying and sabotage carried out by secret services. This was a series which was on Dutch television. And Bart Grootas, a colleague from the European Parliament, was one of the stars in this show. In other words, an invisible war. For a long time, this has applied to pretty much everything happening on the seabed. But the warnings we've had about plans for Russian sabotage and spying in the North Sea and specific examples of sabotage are numerous. The head of the secret services in the Netherlands, Jans Willems, has forced us to face up to facts. The Russians haven't just got one ship. They've got a whole program which has been designed so as to enable them to map out our underwater infrastructure so that they can intervene to disrupt it. The importance of undersea cables and wires is important. Over 90% of worldwide communications goes via undersea internet. 40% of our electricity will, in 2030, come from under the sea. And pipelines from Norway provide more than 25% of the gas we use in Europe. It's very good that the European Commission is coming forward with further plans so as to better protect our underwater infrastructure. However, this is not enough. Small steps, which 27 member states are far too slow. We need rapid action now. We can't and don't have to do this all at the same time. This is why my party, the CDA, calls for a group of European countries which could spearhead these efforts together with NATO and countries such as Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, UK and France. We've already taken initial steps, but we're still moving too slowly. We have to quickly ensure that we have physical and cyber security, international cooperation and alternative cable networks. It's necessary that we do our best to protect our critical infrastructure so as to protect our citizens. We're facing war on the seabed and everybody must face up to that.
Thank you. Next speaker is our colleague Kovasi on behalf of the S&D group. Please take the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Submarine cables are a strategic element for the European Union. Currently, 99% of our internet traffic goes through these submarine cables, which are absolutely vital for communication and which keep our digital network, which is at the heart of our societies, running. But not only does energy run underwater, the cables to island nations are also incredibly important for keeping us interconnected. We only need to think about offshore energy and the Mediterranean. These are critical infrastructure and is all very important in geopolitically important areas. We need to protect them against attack. We heard recently in the news about cables which are vulnerable to attack by drones and missiles. Of course, there are other natural risks which the submarine cables face as well, which need to be taken into account. It's for that reason that this project needs to take into account the maintenance and protection of these important cables. These are we've now got submarine drones, which can also help us to protect this vital infrastructure. And we need a European dimension to this. We need mapping, exchange of information, and risk analysis. The Commissioner reminded us of how important this is, but that isn't enough. We need innovative solutions as well to help us to ensure that our cables are protected. The European Defence Fund, the Connecting Europe Facility, and Horizon Europe have a role to play here. A lot of our information goes through these submarine cables, and so we need European level protection for them. Thank you.
Chair, the Commissioner.
Thank you. Next speaker is Groothuis.
this Parliament on the security of subsea infrastructure. So you might conclude I'm obsessed with it. But I guarantee you there's someone even more obsessed with it, and his name is Vladimir Putin. NATO, and also individual countries, like Tom Berendsen just said, they are already operationally active to start countering Putin's sabotage capabilities. And last week, the European Commission has put forward a good plan. Finally, Commissioner, I must say, to help protect our subsea infrastructure, thank you. But I ask you to focus only on the things that the EU does best and leave the rest to NATO or individual member states. First, make sure that Russian and Chinese companies are excluded from commercial projects connecting Europe with internet cables. I ask for binding rules so that it can be enforced by the European Commission. Secondly, actively increase the connectivity of our continent with the rest of the world, so sabotage will be less effective and consumer prices will be lower. Thirdly, create joint European subsea capabilities. Start by setting a standard for a European repair ship, for example, and build it. Set a standard for Coast Guard vessels. Jointly build them. Set the standards and do it. Buy them. Set up a joint program around it for joint information sharing, joint response, joint mitigation. Plant a flag by building concrete capabilities, because I've seen plenty of strategy. Now let's see the execution, because with the current threat, execution is the strategy. Thank you very much.
Bedankt. A teraz poprosím kolegu.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Cuff on behalf of the Greens Group.
If our cables go down, our economy goes down. Undersea cables between Ireland and Europe are increasingly important for our economies and our communications and our energy supplies. 90% of Ireland's territory is underwater. Pipelines, electricity and data cables traverse this space. And offshore wind installations are increasing. We must ensure that all of this critical infrastructure is protected. In 2022, the Russian Ministry of Defence proposed exercises over vital cables off the Irish coast. While this proposal was rescinded, it highlighted a key vulnerability. If our defence forces are to effectively defend the state against new hybrid threats, their budget must be upgraded. This will help plug the gaping holes in our ability to identify who or what traverses our sea and sky. We must work with our neighbours in the future to ensure that this infrastructure, which is critical for Ireland and the European Union, is protected. And I welcome the Commission's recommendations that we should regularly assess and improve the security and resilience of existing and new submarine cables infrastructure. And I believe that Ireland should participate in the PESCO Critical Maritime Infrastructure Protection Project in continued alignment with the state's neutrality position. Bad actors still populate the international stage, and as long as they do, Ireland has a duty to ensure it can defend while also working peacefully to oppose them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A teraz poprosím.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Jambaski on behalf of the ECR Group. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Commissioner. The Commission's proposal is a reasonable and timely one, but we all need to be aware that by way of directives, regulations and others, we will not be able to defend this kind of infrastructure. It must be defended by way of defence, by way of warships, drones and teams that are there to protect them. It is high time that EU member states became aware of the current reality. The current reality is that the European continent can no longer live in peace without really caring. The European continent is under attack. We live in a situation of war, a war that is being waged not just in the region of Donbass. An attack can be launched anytime, by land, at sea, by air. It is high time we became aware of that. It is high time EU governments became aware of the threats we are exposed to. In order to counter that threat, we must be aware of a few very simple facts. Let's put an end to endless talk. Let's put an end to just delivering promises. We must boost the European economy. We must boost our defence capacities. EU member states should not solely rely on the Northern Atlantic Pact for their defence. The current situation the European defence is in shows that our stocks are depleted, that military staff is unprepared, that people are not willing to join the armed forces. There is nothing wrong with directives, but a directive is just a first step. It will not protect our undersea cables. We will be able to protect them if we work within NATO.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Beka za skupinu.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Beck on behalf of the ID Group.
Thank you. We hear that a Chinese vessel severed a cable in the Baltic Sea, a telecoms cable, and we're hearing about sabotage. Now there's going to be retaliatory action against Chinese telecoms firms or the denial of permits for the laying of new cables under the sea. But let's talk about real sabotage. After the sabotage acts in Nord Stream, some countries launched investigations. The Swedes found nothing. The Danish investigators found that there had been sabotage, but it is not a criminal offence, believe it or not. And German authorities found some indications that amateur divers, pro-Ukrainian agents, might have played their role. But we're hearing from the Pentagon that Polish Minister Sikorski was also involved, and Seymour Hersh, the journalist, provided detailed investigative research on the matter as well. So maybe what we need to do here is to focus on genuine protection of critical infrastructure rather than...
Thank you. Our next speaker is colleague Daly on behalf of the Left Group. Please take the floor.
Thanks, President. Much of the submarine cables that we're so desperate to secure are not actually public infrastructure, but are private property owned by multinational consortia whose beneficial owners are mostly unknown, registered in tax havens, or, like Google, have more than enough money anyway to fix a problem if something happens. And something happens regularly. 25% of cables are ruptured every single year by maritime activity, negligence and natural impacts, and nobody even notices it because the traffic is simply rerouted. A report commissioned for the Security and Defence Committee months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine stated that there were no verified reports indicating deliberate attacks on the cable network by any actor, and that the large-scale scenario of complete lack of connectivity suggests a substantial risk of threat inflation. So is it not the case that this is just another part of the relentless drive to launder public money into the defence industry, this time underground? And what good would that do, considering the only actual explosion underground took place in a NATO heartland and nobody saw anything?
Ďakujem pekne. A teraz by som poprosil.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Kelly. Please take the floor.
Simply, Ireland needs to invest more in its own security. Maritime security is pivotal for Ireland's strategic interests, given the vast marine territory under our jurisdiction. This territory extends far beyond our coastline and includes energy pipelines and sub-sea cables, making it of immense importance to the European Union. Approximately 75% of cables in the Northern Hemisphere pass through or are in close proximity to Irish waters. These cables play a crucial role in facilitating 97%, yes, 97% of worldwide communications, encompassing financial transactions, business activities and everyday internet connectivity. No wonder Russian submarines have been observed more and more off our coast. It's time for an Irish approach, but also a common EU approach. Ireland is also seen, unfortunately, as a soft touch for the transit of illegal drugs, as the seizure of 33 million of crystal meth in a warehouse not far from where I live in my constituency, which came from Mexico and was eventually bound for Australia. If that doesn't tell a message, what does?
Thank you very much. A teraz poprosím kolegu.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Torvalds. Please take the floor.
Ärade talman, herr kommissionär. Om vi kastar en blick på Europas karta.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. If you take a look at the map of Northern Europe, you can see something quite interesting. Oh, the President's just told me I'm not allowed to hold up maps. So I was trying to show you a map of Northern Europe. If you look at that map, which I can't hold up, you would see that Russia is our neighbour. And you'll see that Finland would best be described as an island in Northern Europe. All our connections go undersea. And when we heard about this recent case where a Chinese vessel carried out an attack on the Baltic connector, that gives you an indication of the risks, since all the connections between Finland and Estonia are undersea. This means that Finland is extremely vulnerable. This makes it particularly important that we be in a position to protect those connections. Given the position of Russia in the Eastern Baltic, it's important that we really do protect those canals. However, that means the European Union should finally take the risk seriously.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Monteiro de Aguiar.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I wish to congratulate the Commission on this initiative, which will guarantee the resilience and security of submarine cables for many regions of the European Union, including the outermost regions and Madeira, where I hail from. This is an essential part of allowing those regions to develop and grow. I make the following call. When we decide on projects of European general interest, we need to recognize those importance of submarine cables, not because of how essential they are, but also because of their geopolitical roles. If you look at Madeira, there is a strategic project that was recently tabled, which was going to connect different outermost regionals, so connecting with the Canary Islands and the Azores archipelago, and is going to link up to existing networks that exist with Africa and Brazil. And this is a crucial project for those outermost regions and will allow access to data, environmental data, scientific activity, and maritime security. So we'll keep then the regions connected with both with Europe and the other side of the Atlantic and Africa. So please let us support social and economic development in those outermost regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Kelleher.
As at the heart of the Irish economic success story, we are home to 16 of the 20 largest tech companies, the top 3 enterprise software companies. We have 82 data centres from companies such as Facebook, Amazon and Apple located in the country. Crucially, and most importantly, 3/4 of all subsea cables in the Northern Hemisphere pass through or near Irish waters, with massive flows of data through them. Therefore, I welcome the Commission's statement last week on subsea cables, and I am calling on my government to engage to ensure that they protect our strategic and economic interests to ensure that these cables are safe and protected from nefarious third countries. In January 2022, we all remember when Russian warships were moored off the coast of Ireland, pretending not to be scoping out the cables and looking for weaknesses. For Ireland, it will mean properly working with and collaborating with the military and cyber authorities in other Western member states and our friends in the United Kingdom and the United States. And the Irish Government must also invest strategically in the Irish Navy in enhancing its capacity with regard to additional ships and radar as well. A failure to do so will undermine our capacity to protect these cables and data flowing through them and our economic prosperity.
Thank you very much. And teraz by som poprosil kolegu.
Thank you. Now we have Madame Chabot. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the Commission for this communication on submarine cables. This fits very snugly in a European strategy on the sea, a blue strategy, if you like, on the blue economy, but also geostrategic in nature. This blue strategy is something that I've been crying out for since the start of my term in office, and I hope it will see a fulfilment in the next legislature. There's just one point I'd like to pick up in the communication on the necessity to guarantee a reduced or minimal impact of infrastructure on the environment and climate, especially coastal and marine ecosystems, which are very rich, but also are carbon sinks. So it's important that we work together on these infrastructures. I support the development of these infrastructures, but it needs to be integrated in the spatial planning of maritime areas, given how it interacts with other areas. And this can be done by an implementation of solutions based on the environment and where we can have a positive impact on the environment. This is something that needs to apply to the land as well. These data centers use up a lot of energy, we know that. We need to look for solutions which are being tested at the moment of having immersive systems or recuperating heat. And this is all the more important, I believe, because one day probably we will have to remove these cables, which are so necessary today, but may be obsolete on one day in the future, and they're at the bottom of our ocean, so we need to think about that. Thank you.
And now we go over to the HDI, and as the first one, I would like to ask the colleague Castaldo.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, the risk of sabotage and attacks on submarine cables is one of the most dangerous risks to our security and economy. This communication comes up with innovations, for example, CPEIs to make sure that we have connectivity on our continent, as well as future prevention of risk and vulnerability in joint action. Are we doing enough, however? Should we perhaps think about what we could happen outside of our borders, for example, in those areas that have the highest instability? Recently, the submarine cables in the Red Sea showed to us the devastating impact that any hostile action could have. 99% of all of the information travels undersea, all seas, ours and others. So in Europe, we must uphold our security, but we cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that there is risk in a highly interconnected world, therefore, without Europe. So we should have partnerships with our partners that share our principles and values to defend these infrastructures, making sure that we have monitoring and constant scrutiny. This is the global challenge, and there can only be a global answer. We cannot hesitate. We don't have time to waste. We must, as Europe, spearhead this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mr. Wallace.
Thank you very much, President. There's been much talk about the threat to undersea cables in the Red Sea, but Ansarallah have made it clear that they have no intention of targeting internet cables destined for regional countries. They are solely targeting ships that are facilitating the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Now, how are we supposed to take the Commission's concern for undersea cables seriously when the Nord Stream investigations are going cold? This was a terrorist attack on critical EU infrastructure that has affected the lives of every person in the EU. Along with the brain-dead sanctions against Russia, this act of sabotage compounded rising energy costs, a cost of living crisis and an EU-wide economic downturn. Sweden and Denmark have abandoned their investigations into the destruction of Nord Stream. How bad that the EU countries don't even want to know the truth about what really happened. See no evil, speak no evil. Accountability is less important than maintaining propaganda narratives. Smear the enemy and bury the evidence. It's a shocking indictment on the EU that they don't want to know the truth about Nord Stream.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegyň.
Thank you. Now we have Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, President. Much of the discussion in Ireland is about naval capacity, but the recommendation we're debating today makes no mention of naval capability, and there is no way that Ireland could or should survey or police subsea cables, which are, for the most part, not in our territorial waters, and in any case privately owned. Whether we like it or not, we will have to cooperate with partners like UK, Iceland and other EU member states, and partners have made it clear that they want to work through NATO. It's not about joining NATO, but about cooperating in a flexible way with NATO on exchange of information and situation analysis. Finally, Ireland can make a significant contribution to the new expert group referred to in the recommendation. We can provide information, carry out risk assessments and cable mapping, and cooperate with the expert group in this way. And we can also work on fast approval of planning and licensing applications which otherwise are holding up the work of the securing resilient submarine cables. Finally, I think we need to press the Commission expert group for recognition of cable projects of European interest in Ireland and associated funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to close the debate, I would like to kindly ask Monsieur Commissioner to take the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, undersea digital cables are, of course, part and parcel of the European Union's critical infrastructure, on a par with energy and transport infrastructure, and therefore it is our joint responsibility to protect them from physical as well as cyber threats, and our long-term economic interests go in that direction. Now, this recommendation highlights the growing interest in this issue from our competitors in other regions, particularly recent initiatives such as the Undersea Cable Control Act, which has been put forward by the House of Representatives in the US, or the Chinese cable project, which is just one example amongst many. All attest to the interest being shown in this sector by foreign governments, as well as the sensitivity of international undersea connections in bolstering the resilience of the international community. Now, given the international backdrop, then we have to cooperate closely with our international partners. Now, many of you stressed that point, particularly with the United States, with NATO and the G7. I should like to thank you for your unwavering support on this strategic issue, and there are a number of other concerns which you've also aired, for example, for outermost regions or for the eco-design of these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have now finished this item. Now we adjourn the meeting, the session, and we'll continue at 12 o'clock with the votes. Thank you.